The crash had been violent. Smoke rose from the shattered remains of the Kitheri starship, its metal body torn apart by the atmosphere of the unknown planet. Sparks flickered from broken circuits, and fire licked the edges of the wreckage. Inside, Valeth groaned as she struggled to stay conscious. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, and pain throbbed through her body. She had been on an important mission for the Kitheri Empire, but now she was stranded, injured, and alone. Through blurry vision, she saw movement outside. A figure stepped through the thick smoke. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a rugged coat, the stranger moved with careful confidence. His face was shadowed, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Can you move?" Valeth flinched. A human. Her pride told her to ignore him, but her body betrayed her. She could barely lift her arm. "Help me," she whispered. The man crouched beside her and checked her wounds. His hands were strong, but surprisingly gentle. "You're lucky to be alive," he muttered before lifting her effortlessly. Valeth winced but said nothing. As he carried her away from the wreck, Valeth tried to focus. She had always been told that humans were weak, simple creatures. Yet this one moved with quiet strength. He didn't hesitate. He didn't panic. He acted like a warrior. They reached a small, hidden shelter built into the rocky cliffs. The man laid her down on a makeshift bed and began treating her wounds. "Who are you?" Valeth asked weakly. The man hesitated, then finally spoke. Daniel Carter." The moment she heard the name, her body stiffened. Her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. She had heard that name before. Every Kitheri had. It was a name whispered in military halls, a name from war records, a name that carried both fear and respect. Daniel Carter, the human who had once stood against the Kitheri Empire. Her rescuer was a legend. Valeth's mind raced. Daniel Carter. She had heard that name many times before. It was spoken in the war councils of the Kitheri Empire, in the stories of soldiers who had fought against him. But this man, this simple human who had just saved her, did not look like the legend she had imagined. He was rugged, worn by time, dressed in a scavenger's coat, and carried no grand weapons. Could this really be him? Daniel didn't seem to notice her reaction. He finished bandaging her arm, his movements quick and efficient. "You should rest," he said, standing up. "You lost a lot of blood." Valeth struggled to keep her voice steady. "Your name, it is known among my people." Daniel paused for a moment. His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, something dark and tired. "I know." His calm answer only made her more uneasy. If this was the same Daniel Carter, then why was he here, living like a forgotten man? She sat up, ignoring the pain in her ribs. "You fought against the Kitheri Empire," she said slowly, watching his face. "You were supposed to be dead." Daniel sighed and ran a hand through his dark, unkempt hair. "Yeah, a lot of people think that." Valeth clenched her jaw. She had grown up believing that humans were weak, that they could never match the strength and intelligence of the Kitheri. Yet here she was, being saved by a human warrior who had once defied her empire. She studied him carefully. His movements were precise, controlled, like a soldier who had seen too many battles. But there was also something else in his eyes. A man who had lost too much. "Why are you here?" she finally asked. Daniel leaned against the rocky wall of the shelter, crossing his arms. "Why are you here?" he countered. Valeth hesitated. She couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. But she needed answers. "My ship crashed," she said. "That much is obvious." Daniel smirked. "Yeah, I noticed." She frowned. "The Kitheri are looking for me." At this, Daniel's expression changed. His relaxed posture stiffened slightly. "Then you're not safe here," he said. "If they find you, they'll kill you." Valeth narrowed her eyes. "You say that like you know how my people think." Daniel met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw the fire behind his eyes. "I do. A cold realization settled over her. This man knew the Ktheri better than any human should. Before she could speak again, a distant sound echoed through the rocky canyon. The roar of approaching ships. Daniel's expression hardened. They're here. The deep roar of approaching engines sent a chill through Valeth's body. The Ktheri had found her. Daniel moved instantly. He grabbed a worn rifle from the corner of the shelter and slung a small backpack over his shoulder. We need to go. Now. Valeth hesitated. These were her people. The Ktheri Empire was the most powerful force in the galaxy. If she called out, they would rescue her. But then she remembered. They weren't here to save her. They were here to kill her. She forced herself to stand, even though her body ached. How do you know they'll attack? She asked. Daniel gave her a sharp look. Because I know the Ktheri, and they don't leave loose ends. Before she could respond, a bright beam of light swept across the rocky cliffs outside. The sound of metallic footsteps echoed as soldiers landed from dropships, their weapons humming with energy. Daniel cursed under his breath. Come on. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the back of the shelter. Valeth yanked her hand away. I can walk. Daniel didn't argue. He just turned and led the way through a narrow passage, hidden behind a curtain of dry vines. They emerged onto a steep cliffside overlooking a valley. Below, a thick forest stretched into the distance. We make it to the forest. We survive, Daniel said. They won't risk ground combat in unknown terrain. Valeth's sharp eyes caught movement above them. 3 Ktheri soldiers in dark armor stood at the edge of the wreckage. One of them lifted a communicator. The target is not in the ship. Initiating search. Daniel grabbed Valeth's arm. Time's up. Move. They scrambled down the rocky slope, feet slipping on loose gravel. Behind them, a soldier shouted, and a bright blue energy blast slammed into the rock inches from Daniel's head. Valeth didn't need more convincing. She sprinted alongside him, her body protesting with every step. More shots followed, striking the ground in bursts of heat and smoke. Daniel zigzagged as he ran, moving like a man who had been hunted before. Valeth struggled to keep up. How was a human moving faster than her? A sharp pain shot through her shoulder as a blast grazed her. She stumbled, but before she could fall, Daniel caught her and pulled her behind a boulder. You hit? He asked. She gritted her teeth. Just a scratch. He nodded. Then keep running. The forest was only a few hundred meters away now. The soldiers were closing in, but Daniel lifted his rifle and fired a single shot. It hit the ground in front of the Ktheri, kicking up a cloud of dust. That won't stop them for long, Valeth said. Daniel smirked. It doesn't have to. Just long enough. Then they ran into the shadows of the forest, where the real fight was about to begin. The dense forest swallowed them in darkness. Towering trees stretched high, their thick leaves blocking the moonlight. The sounds of distant wildlife filled the air, but behind them, the footsteps of Ktheri soldiers were getting closer. Valeth forced herself to keep running. Her body ached, her wounds burned, but she couldn't stop now. Ahead of her, Daniel moved like a ghost, barely making the sound. He wasn't just running. He was leading them somewhere. After a few minutes, he suddenly grabbed her wrist and pulled her behind a massive tree trunk. Stop. Stay quiet. She pressed her back against the rough bark, breathing hard. Daniel crouched low, peeking through the thick undergrowth. His rifle was ready, but he didn't fire. Valeth narrowed her eyes. They're hunting us. We should keep moving. Daniel shook his head. No, let them come. Before she could question him, she heard the metallic hum of Ktheri weapons. A squad of 3 soldiers moved through the trees, scanning the area with glowing visors. One of them spoke into a communicator. No sign of the target. Continue search pattern. Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle, but instead of attacking, he reached for a knife strapped to his belt. Valeth's heart pounded. Why would he fight with a knife against energy weapons? Then he moved. Fast. Before the Kitheri could react, Daniel lunged from the shadows. The knife flashed in the dim light, one clean strike to the nearest soldier's neck. The Kitheri collapsed without a sound. The second soldier turned, but Daniel was faster. A brutal kick to the chest sent the alien crashing into a tree. The third Kitheri aimed his rifle. Valeth's instincts took over. She grabbed a fallen branch and swung it with all her strength. The soldier staggered, giving Daniel enough time to close the distance. His knife found its mark. Silence fell. Valeth stared at Daniel. His breathing was steady, his hands firm. He had taken down 3 elite Kitheri soldiers in seconds. This was no ordinary scavenger. Daniel wiped his knife on his sleeve and turned to her. "We need to keep moving. More will come." Valeth swallowed hard. "You fight like a Kitheri assassin." He gave a humorless smirk. "No, I fight like a human who's been at war for too long." Something about his voice made her shiver. She had trained with the best Kitheri warriors, but Daniel Carter moved with a precision she had never seen before. This was the man who had once fought the Kitheri Empire. This was the legend. And now, for the first time, she realized something terrifying. If he had wanted to kill her, she would already be dead. The forest was silent now. The bodies of the Kitheri soldiers lay motionless in the undergrowth, their weapons still glowing faintly. The scent of blood and burnt energy filled the air. Valeth's mind was racing. Daniel Carter was far more dangerous than she had imagined. The way he fought, calm, efficient, deadly, was unlike anything she had seen before. She followed him deeper into the forest, her steps cautious. She needed to get back to her people. Her mission was too important. The Kitheri Empire was in trouble. Internal conflicts, power struggles, hidden enemies. She had been sent on a secret mission to find something or someone that could change everything. And now, she had found Daniel Carter. A living legend, a human warrior who had once defied her empire. If she brought him back, he could be useful. Maybe the empire could control him, study him, even use him against their enemies. Her decision was made. When Daniel wasn't looking, she reached into the small device strapped to her wrist. The distress signal, the single push, and the Kitheri forces would come. She hesitated. Daniel had saved her life. Twice. But she wasn't a traitor. She was a Kitheri noble. Her duty was to the Empire. Her fingers pressed the button. The signal was sent. They reached a clearing near a small river. Daniel knelt by the water, filling his canteen. Valeth felt a strange guilt creeping into her chest. Should she warn him? Should she tell him what she had done? Before she could decide, a distant roar filled the air. Daniel tensed. He heard it too. The sound of engines. Kitheri dropships. He turned to her, his sharp eyes filled with suspicion. "Did you call them?" Valeth opened her mouth to deny it, but before she could speak, bright searchlights cut through the trees. The Kitheri had arrived. Daniel's face darkened. He took a step back, gripping his rifle. "You did." Valeth felt her stomach twist. Why did she feel like she had made a mistake? A voice boomed from above. "Surrender the human. Do not resist." Valeth raised her hands, stepping forward. "I have him," she called out. "I am Kitheri. Take me back to the Empire." The ship's weapons powered up. Soldiers in sleek black armor descended from the air, their energy rifles aimed. But something was wrong. One of the soldiers spoke coldly. "The Empire has no use for failures." Valeth's blood ran cold. They weren't here to save her. They were here to kill her. She turned to Daniel, her heart pounding. She had betrayed him, but now she was betrayed too. Daniel sighed, shaking his head. "Yeah," he muttered. "I saw that coming." Then he raised his rifle. And all hell broke loose. The first energy blast ripped through the trees, narrowly missing Daniel's head. He didn't flinch. Instead, he moved like a predator, diving behind a fallen log and returning fire with deadly precision. Valeth stood frozen. The Kitheri were not here to rescue her. The realization hit her like a thunderstrike. She had been discarded, just like Daniel had predicted. More soldiers dropped from the hovering ship, their armor reflecting the bright lights above. Their weapons were trained on both of them. A sharp voice echoed through the forest. "Kill them both. No survivors." Daniel cursed. "I really hate being right." Then he grabbed Valeth's wrist and yanked her down just as another energy blast scorched the air above her head. She gasped. Why was he still protecting her? She had betrayed him. Daniel didn't hesitate. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metallic sphere. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled it toward the soldiers. Boom! A blinding flash erupted, followed by a thick cloud of smoke. The soldiers coughed, momentarily disoriented. "Run." Daniel's voice was sharp, commanding. Valeth didn't argue. This time, she ran with him. They sprinted through the trees, weaving between the trunks as blasts of energy tore through the branches. Valeth's heart pounded. The pain in her body screamed, but adrenaline kept her moving. Behind them, the Kitheri forces regrouped quickly. They were elite. Hunters. They wouldn't stop. Daniel glanced at her. "Any more tricks up your sleeve?" Valeth clenched her jaw. "I had a tracker on my ship. If I can reach it, I might be able to override their signal and jam communications." Daniel nodded. "Then let's get to it." They burst out of the tree line, skidding to a stop near a small rocky ridge. Below them, the wreckage of Valeth's ship still smoldered. She hurried toward the control panel on the side of the hull. Her fingers flew over the cracked screen, entering command codes as fast as she could. The jamming signal was activating, but they were out of time. A Kitheri soldier leaped from the ridge, slamming into Daniel. They tumbled across the ground, fists and blades flashing. Valeth turned, her breath catching. Daniel rolled, dodging a knife aimed at his throat. He was fast, stronger than she expected, but the soldier was just as deadly. The enemy struck again. Daniel caught the wrist midair and twisted. A sickening crack echoed as the Kitheri collapsed. Daniel stood, wiping blood from his lip. "Tell me you got it." Valeth exhaled sharply. "Signal is jammed. They can't call for reinforcements." Daniel grinned. "Then we just have to kill the ones already here." Valeth met his gaze. A few hours ago, she saw humans as weak. Now she saw something terrifying. Daniel Carter wasn't just a survivor. He was a warrior. And for the first time, she wasn't sure who the real predator was. The forest echoed with the sound of approaching soldiers. The Kitheri forces were regrouping, their glowing visors cutting through the smoke and shadows. Valeth's hands trembled as she secured the jamming signal. They couldn't call for reinforcements now, but that didn't mean they weren't still deadly. Daniel wiped the blood off his knuckles and rolled his shoulders. "We can't run forever." Valeth narrowed her eyes. "You think we should fight?" Daniel smirked, but it wasn't amusement. It was confidence. "I think we should hunt." Valeth felt a chill run down her spine. There was something different about him now. The way he stood, the way his muscles tensed. He wasn't running anymore. He was preparing for war. The trap. Daniel scanned the terrain quickly. Every rock, every tree, every shadow. He saw it all. "We used their training against them," he said. "They think they're the predators. Let's show them they're the prey." Valeth hesitated. This was madness. The Kitheri were elite warriors. Humans weren't supposed to be stronger. But then she remembered how Daniel had killed 3 soldiers in seconds, how he moved like a shadow. Maybe, just maybe, he was something different. She nodded. "What's the plan?" Daniel grinned. "Follow my lead." The first kill. The first group of Kitheri moved cautiously through the trees, weapons ready. They expected resistance. They expected a chase. They didn't expect Daniel Carter. He struck from above, dropping from a low branch like a ghost. His knife flashed, and the first soldier fell before he even screamed. The second soldier turned, too late. Daniel's boot slammed into his chest, sending him crashing into a rock. Valeth was stunned. Humans weren't supposed to be this fast, this strong. The third soldier aimed his rifle. Valeth didn't think. She lunged forward, grabbing the enemy's arm and twisting hard. The rifle fired into the sky as Daniel's blade finished the job. Silence. 3 soldiers dead in seconds. Valeth exhaled shakily. You're not normal. Daniel chuckled. I've heard that before. No mercy. More soldiers were coming. But now, they weren't hunting. They were afraid. Daniel moved like a shadow, striking before they could react. One by one, the Kitheri fell. This wasn't a battle. This was a slaughter. Valeth watched, her heart pounding. She had been raised to believe humans were weak. But watching Daniel Carter fight, she realized the truth. Humans weren't weak. They were monsters. And the Kitheri had just made the mistake of hunting the deadliest one of them all. The forest was no longer a battleground. It was a graveyard. The Kitheri forces lay scattered among the trees, their bodies motionless, their weapons silent. The ones who were still alive moved cautiously, their glowing visors scanning the shadows. They had come as hunters. Now, they were prey. Valeth pressed her back against a tree, her breath shallow. She had fought beside the best Kitheri warriors, trained with assassins and elite soldiers, but she had never seen anything like this. Daniel Carter was no ordinary human. He was something else. A soldier stepped forward, his rifle raised. He didn't even see the attack coming. Daniel dropped from a low branch, landing behind the enemy in complete silence. His knife flashed, one quick motion, and the soldier collapsed. The others panicked. "Where is he?" one shouted. A soft voice answered from the darkness. "Right here." Daniel moved like a ghost. Before the soldier could react, Daniel's rifle fired. A single, precise shot. The Kitheri dropped instantly. The remaining troops scattered, their fear evident. This was no longer a fight. It was survival. The turning point. Valeth swallowed hard. This was impossible. One man, against an elite Kitheri squad, and he was winning. She had studied human history. They were survivors, innovators, but they were not stronger than the Kitheri. At least, that's what she had believed. Daniel's eyes met hers through the darkness. There was no fear in them, only cold, focused determination. He had done this before. Many times, a memory surfaced in her mind. Stories of a human who had once taken on an entire Kitheri battalion alone. It had sounded like a myth, a legend. Now she was standing beside him, and she understood why the Kitheri Empire had feared him. The final stand. The last remaining Kitheri commander stood his ground, gripping his energy rifle. He wasn't running. He wasn't afraid. He was ready to die fighting. Daniel stepped forward, lowering his weapon slightly. "You don't have to do this." The commander snarled. "You are an enemy of the Empire. I will not surrender to a human." Daniel sighed. "Yeah, I figured." The commander charged. Fast, but Daniel was faster. In one smooth motion, Daniel sidestepped the attack, grabbed the commander's wrist, and broke it with a sharp twist. The energy rifle clattered to the ground. The commander gasped in pain, dropping to one knee. Daniel stood over him, his knife in hand. For a moment, there was silence. Then Daniel lowered his blade. "Tell your leaders," he said coldly. "Stay away from my planet." The commander stared at him, then nodded weakly. Valeth exhaled. The fight was over. But as she looked at Daniel Carter, she realized something terrifying. The Kitheri weren't the monsters. The real monster was standing right beside her. The battle was over. The Kitheri soldiers lay dead, their weapons scattered across the forest floor. The only survivor, the commander, clutched his broken wrist, his breathing ragged. His glowing visor flickered as he stared at Daniel with something unexpected. Fear. Daniel didn't move. He stood over the defeated commander, his knife still in his hand. His face was calm, his body relaxed, but Valeth knew the truth. He was ready to kill again if needed. The Catheri commander swallowed hard. You are not human. Daniel smirked, shaking his head. You came to hunt a weak species. You were wrong. The commander coughed, pain clear in his voice. The Empire will not forget this. They will send more. Daniel's expression didn't change. Let them try. A broken alliance. Valeth finally stepped forward. Her hands were still shaking, but she forced herself to speak. We need to leave. More will come. Daniel glanced at her, his sharp blue eyes unreadable. Did he still trust her? She had betrayed him once. He had every reason to leave her behind. But instead, he nodded. Then let's go. Valeth hesitated. Why? Why was he still helping her? She turned to the Catheri commander. Tell the Empire that I am dead. Tell them Daniel Carter killed me. The commander's eyes widened. You are Catheri nobility. They will search for you. Valeth's voice was firm. Not if they believe I was a traitor. Not if they think I died here. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Smart move. She met his gaze. I learned from the best. Escape. The two of them moved quickly through the forest, leaving the commander behind. Valeth could feel Daniel's suspicion, but he said nothing. They reached the wreckage of her ship. It was badly damaged, but one of the escape pods was still intact. Valeth activated the control panel. The engine roared to life. She turned to Daniel. Come with me. He crossed his arms. And go where? Valeth took a deep breath. I don't know. But if we stay here, we're both dead. For the first time, she saw hesitation in Daniel's eyes. He wasn't afraid of the Catheri. He wasn't afraid of war. But he had spent years fighting alone. Now she was offering him something different. A future. Finally, he nodded. Fine. But if you betray me again. Valeth smirked. I won't. I've seen what happens to those who do. Daniel chuckled. Smart girl. As the escape pod lifted off, Valeth looked at the planet below. She had come here on a mission. She had expected to capture a dangerous human. Instead, she had found something far more terrifying, a human who refused to be hunted.